Today's PS4 is a CUH-1115A that was purchased off of eBay that the seller claimed was loud and maybe overheating. So hopefully that's all it is. It'll be a simple fix. On receiving it though, when I did my initial check to make sure they sent the hard drive and that they did in fact send a PS4, that's always good. And that it also, I checked to see that it boots to the state that they claim. In this particular case, it came up and essentially couldn't run itself. I forget the exact error. I'll have to check on that. But essentially the database is corrupt, and that in itself is not surprising. Almost all of them come that way. What is surprising is that it couldn't recover. It would get up to a point where it was saying it needed to be updated to such and such version, which is common. You see a lot of those out there that are like that. Usually you can hit cancel a couple of times and it'll eventually recover. In this case it did not, so I had to get into safe mode and do a reset, which I would eventually would have done anyways to get rid of any individuals. The information is on there, and it did come up from that point. But because of that, now the hard drive is suspect, and I'll have to take it and test it here in a bit to confirm that is this hard drive failing or is it not. Hopefully not. It'll be hard to make a profit if I have to replace the hard drive, so we'll see. Take off the hard drive cover, set it aside, not too dirty. This one has already had the void or the warranty stickers removed. Kind of cringe when I see that because you never quite know what somebody's done inside once they've opened it. Remove these two T9 Torx security screws. Take off the right hand cover. Again, not too dirty, a little dusty, but seen far worse than that. Let's get around and take the bottom off now. Again, T12 Torx, or T9 I should say, Torx. There's 3 of them. On this particular model, you just then pry down on the back and it comes off, and again it's clean, which doesn't surprise me considering that the security covers were off of the screws. Does not appear to be that dirty inside, which kind of makes me think that it's probably not going to have a heating problem as we think, but we'll see once we get into the heat sink. First thing I want to do though is I'm going to plug it in and fire it up and see whether I've got fan spin. It could be as simple as the fan is dead. Also, before I do that, I want to check to make sure that I'm plugged in with the fan over here, and it is. So I'm not going to bother plugging in the HDMI because I don't care at this point. I'm just going to plug in the power, and I'm going to touch it to start it. It does look like the fan is dead. We'll see here whether it fires up anymore. Oh yeah, it's got a tight. Is not right. No, There we go. And a loud noise that I didn't have before. That is not good. It is the fan making that noise. Well, that would explain the overheating. So we need to get that fan out of there. I believe I've got a spare. If not, I'll have to order one. First thing that I do is remove the APU hold down. And then the security screws around the outside. Take out the power supply, you remove this security screw. And this. Aggravating. I have spares, but whoever worked on this last did not put the grounding screws back in. This screw right here retains the motherboard. Disconnect the Bluetooth Wi-Fi antenna. Disconnect the fan by lifting up, not pulling out. And lift the motherboard out of place from the front to the back. Not much thermal paste left on here. They didn't bother putting new on, whoever worked on it last. You need to remove these 3 screws in order to remove this bottom pan to get to the fan. There is some dust, but not enough to cause overheating, but the bad fan is enough to do that. And finally, there's 2 screws remaining on the fan. And there's the bad fan. Disassemble the DVD drive. Do this by taking out these 3 Phillips screws on top. The 4th does not, corner does not. When you take these off, you have to lift from back here, and this corner without a screw is underneath a little tab. Do not lift straight up, you will break it. Don't see any damage or anything wrong with it. Take a clean cotton swab, add some 99% IPA, and very lightly clean the lens on the laser. I'm going to go over these. Look to be in pretty good shape, but these rollers need to be clean and slightly tacky, and after a while they are neither. You rotate this with this small Phillips looking thing on the side here. You can see that they're turning. You probably can't see, but they are turning. So as I turn it, I'm cleaning. And because I'm using IPA, it'll be slightly tacky when we're done. Which is exactly what we want. Before we reassemble it, I'm just going to check that these switches in the back physically work. I can't tell that they work electronically without it being powered, of course. But I'll make sure they're not stuck. To reassemble, you've got to pop this side without the screw under the little tab. Take that out. I need to clean this front so that there's no scratching of the discs. To reassemble this, you take the side that doesn't have the screw and pop it under the little tab and then just drop it down into place and put your 3 screws back in. Make sure this mechanism works. Don't be overly aggressive with it. It is complicated and easily broken. Clean off the old thermal paste before I reassemble this. And that's original. No one's done anything with this other than tear it apart and leave screws off. And clean off the RAM surrounding the APU. They don't get thermal paste, but they do get thermal pads put on there, and it's better to have them clean. And the same is true on the other side. Everything's been taken apart and the mid-frame's been thoroughly cleaned. I did find a replacement fan. The same fan fits on both the 1000X and the 1100X. The 1200, well, the fan is exactly the same, the end is different. You cannot use those. So to put this back together, I've got 2 screws. One goes here. And one goes here. The base pan has been cleaned thoroughly, including the heatsink, removing all the old thermal paste. The fan, or excuse me, the heatsink vanes have been thoroughly blown out and cleaned as well. So put that back on. Making sure to put the fan wire above it. Remount that with the 3 small screws. This screw being the 3rd screw that was left out of the fan. And 3. Added all of the thermal pads where they should be on the bottom pad. This is important to wick the heat away from the RAM. thermal compound to the APU. I know some will complain at me that's probably too much, but it's non-conductive and I'd rather have too much as too little. It mounts into the back first. Make sure that's got room, because I leave the wire for the power supply on here. I've got to deal with that. Drops down in the back first, and then down in the front. Connect the fan so I don't forget. Again, it goes down, not out. The top pan, again, making sure that all of the thermal pads are in place where they should be. It just drops down into place. Add my Torx screws. And a couple of places to hold it down, not tighten it down all the way. Need to add the APU hold down. I'll add the rest of the Torx security screws to hold the top pan down. Put the DVD drive back into place. Make sure that you get this little tab here on the outside of the plastic. Same thing on the back. The Torx screws back in place. I usually start with this one, otherwise I end up forgetting it. It's underneath wiring. Get the small Phillips on the front so that the gap is correct. Make sure that the wire from the DVD is routed as it should be through the little tabs. Connect to the motherboard. Bluetooth wireless antenna goes on here before you put the screw on this corner. Both the Bluetooth antenna and the connector for the DVD go under this little tab right here. Additionally, the Bluetooth antenna Wi-Fi goes under these two little tabs right here. Make sure you plug the DVD into the motherboard, and that the antenna is also plugged into the motherboard. These are easily damaged, so be careful when pressing it on. Just hear it pop a little bit there and it's on. Okay. And finally, the ribbon cable for the DVD. Make sure you hold the little tabs down while pressing them back in. And finally, the power supply has been thoroughly blown out and cleaned. Plug it back in over here. Make sure everything's plugged in down here. It is. And then carefully set this back into place with even pressure. Add the torque screws to secure it. And my replacement ground screws that were left off by whoever worked on it last. They are important. And finally, I'm going to put in the hard drive for the moment so that we can see if our fan fix worked before assembling it the rest of the way. Okay, I'm going to test this. I'm not going to bother plugging it into the screen yet. I just plugged in the power, and I'm going to turn it on and see that the fan spins and doesn't make a racket. It does as expected. It fired up to begin with. It is not noisy. And that is how I would expect it. I'm now going to wait for it to shut down, and I'll assemble it the rest of the way, or at least the bottom, and we'll connect it to a monitor and see how it behaves. And here we have it all assembled. The assembling of the outer case, unfortunately, the camera apparently did not record. Sorry about that, but I'm sure you've seen it been. It reassembled plenty of times. Everything looks good. We're going to put it in to a little heavier testing, a couple or 3 days before I put it up on eBay, make sure that it doesn't overheat. So everything looks good. And here's how it'll be presented to eBay. We've run it through some tests, make sure that it doesn't overheat and all that, and everything seems good, so it'll be up for sale. Thanks for watching this.